Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to the ICA. I am Rosalie Dobell, Associate Curator here. I am delighted to welcome Franco Berardi and Benjamin Noys for today's Culture Now talk. Of course, two figures who need very little introduction. We know Franco as the founder of Radio Alice in 1976 and as one of the most prominent members of the autonomia movement. His recent books in English include The Uprising on Poetry and Finance, After the Future, and The Soul at Work from Alienation to Autonomy. Benjamin Noys is Professor of Critical Theory at the University of Chichester. Among other works, he's the author of The Persistence of the Negative, a Critique of Contemporary Theory, and his most recent book, Malign Velocities, Accelerationism and Capitalism, published by Zero last year, presents a critique of the politics of accelerationism. Today, the pair are here to discuss Bifo's new work, which I'm clutching, Heroes, Mass Murder and Suicide, recently published by Verso this year. This is part of a new series by Verso called Verso Futures, which presents new books on contemporary theory. New books include ones by Paolo Verno, Isabelle Laurie and Marc Auger. We have just 1 hour and, of course, a huge amount to cover. There will be questions, but please do wait for the microphone. For now, I'm very happy to hand over to you, Franco and Ben.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Ben. I will be asking Franco some questions as we're here to hear what Franco has to say for about 45 minutes, and then you'll have your turn. To begin at the end, at the start of the conclusion of Heroes, you pose the question, why did I write such a horrible book? If you don't know the subject, the subtitle of Heroes is Mass Murder and Suicide, and much of the book concerns mass killers and waves of suicide. So, to begin the discussion then, I wanted to ask you why you wrote such a horrible book, in light of your career, which has moved through several waves of politicization and depoliticization. The movement of '68, as a member of Potere Operae, Workers' Power, the movement of Autonomia in 1977, the alter-globalization movement of the late 90s and early 2000s, and the current anti-austerity campaigns in Europe. So why this book now?
Now.
Yes.
Now is the word. Now we live in a sort of no way out situation for many points of view. Look at the European situation that is a little bit obsessing me, but not only me. What's the impression? The impression is that the only way out is the victory of the Front National in France or something like that. Obviously, we are looking for something different, but the overall perception, especially if I look at the new generation, the overall perception is a perception of no way out. And actually, during the last 35 years, according to the World Health Organization, the suicide rate in the world has been increasing of 60%, right? So I put this information together, and I say now it's the moment of looking at reality from the point of view of the perception of no way out. Suicide is probably a good subject. This is why I decided also. The second reason is that if I look at the prevailing form of power, of politics, of economy, the only way I can explain financial capitalism is starting from a consideration of suicidal strategy. So suicide becomes a strong word that gives us the possibility of understanding something. This is why I decided now to write this book.
Thank you.
This horrible book.
Yeah, well, a book on a horrible subject. Yeah, so I was also interested in terms, like you say, of this kind of dual suicidal dynamic, those subjects of capital committing suicide, those subjected to it, and those kind of implementing suicidal strategies. In regard to the general tendency of autonomia and post-autonomist thought to a kind of optimism, thinking here particularly of Antonio Negri, a kind of stress on the powers of life, on the vital elements of resistance. And in your work, which I think is important, and this is a part, you've stressed the potency of depression. And like you say, you're stressing the kind of necessity to face the reality that we don't have an exit. So I was wondering how you think about the potency of depression in relation to these other kind of competing accounts of the potency of life.
Well, only apparently you can find a contradiction between the Negri emphasis on the potency of joyful sentiments and of love, and my emphasis on the dark splatter. Only apparently, because at the methodological level, at the philosophical level, there is something in common. There is a common ground that is the attempt to explain something of the economic and political power by the point of view of the affectivity, the affective approach to the social processes. This is the common ground, if you want, in a sense. I don't prefer to be. I'm not a depressive person, believe me, and I strongly dislike the doomsayers attitude and people who say you are wrong, you will be punished. This is not my cup of tea. But I also like. I mean, I always had a penchant for a sort of black humor that gives you the possibility of better appreciate what is beautiful in life. And actually, I think that now it's the moment to look at things from the point of view of someone who says, I don't see, I only see dark around me. Probably I'm blind. So you see, this is the suggestion that I give at the end after saying, why did I write such an horrible book? I also ask myself, what should be done when nothing? What should we do when nothing can be done? And my suggestion is irony. Irony is not an easy line of escape. Irony does not mean let's joke about bad things. No, not at all. It's not a joke. Irony is not a joke. Irony has nothing to do with laughing or satire or that. Irony is the consciousness that you don't know. That you don't know everything, that what you know is not enough. This is the irony, is the understanding of an ambiguity which is implied in the world, which is implied in your understanding of the world. So irony is about the excess in language, the excess in understanding, the excess in politics. The solution is exactly where we have not been looking at. And is there the solution, but we forgot to look in that direction. This is what I say. And dystopia and irony. I think that from Philip Dick to William Burroughs to Baudrillard, don't forget Baudrillard, please. The irony and dystopia have to become a starting point for a new reflection, for a new imagination, political imagination, existential imagination.
Can I follow up on that point about irony? Because obviously, like you say, there's a tendency to associate it with a position of superiority, a kind of the people who have irony versus those who are being treated ironically. And also, which we find in Hegel, the notion of irony as a kind of subjective position. And I was interested in what you thought about the kind of collective possibility of irony as a form of detachment. How would that be articulated amongst people rather than just individual acts?
Well, rightly, you quote Hegel and you make quote the large part of the German romantic poetry and philosophy. Well, of course, irony has many possible nuances, but the general meaning of irony, since the romantic discovery of this possibility, has always been the perception of an excess in language. What language captures of reality is always missing something, probably missing the decisive point. The problem in the romantic concept of irony, of course, is the reference to a possible, to a coming, to a future totalization, to the possibility of finally overcoming this fragmented perception of reality that gives us the possibility. Well, I am a materialist, so I think that this fragmentation is forever, that this condition of, the good side of alienation. Alienation is not only missing something of yourself in the relation with things, is also what I call estrangement, the ability to look at things, to look at the world as a condition that is only partially capturing you. Irony is the autonomy. But what is autonomy at the very end? Autonomy is the suggestion not to be too serious. Please relax. It's not so important what will happen to the humankind. Of course it's important, but you will be able to understand and to do something only if you understand that there is something more. There is always something more. You have not understood everything. I have not understood everything.
Neither have I. Certainly. Yeah, I mean, to follow up, I can see what you're saying about the kind of need for a sense of humor, but at the same time, the situation does seem serious in terms of the fate of large amounts of humankind. So I'm wondering, again, sort of who is the kind of irony for, and how a kind of humor and a detachment could be a kind of motivating or engaging political project, when obviously most ways of articulating politics at the moment are in terms of urgency and the need to do something now about the crisis of financial capitalism, climate change, etc. So I'm just wondering how a kind of irony and a humor will, if you like, compete, to use a capitalist word, with a kind of discourse of seriousness and disaster, if you like.
Yeah. So let's start to be serious now. And when I speak of suicide, there, yes, I'm considering the phenomenology daily life and, for instance, of the behavior of the precarious generation and so on. But the main object of my consideration is financial capitalism. I mean, you remember, let's think about, let's try to understand what is financial capitalism, what's happening, what is the difference between industrial capitalism and the present form of financial capitalism. And if I try to understand something in that difference, the word that comes to my mind is the word nihilism. And the word nihilism has a story. Of course, Nietzsche is the name that comes to the mind, but the Nietzsche's nihilism is not exactly what is on the table nowadays. When Nietzsche speaks of nihilism, he is talking about, I call it hermeneutical nihilism, the understanding of the non-existing of a fundamental ground at the ontological level, at the ethical level. So values are the product of a creation which is based on the interpretation starting from zero, starting from the present nihilism has a different feature, a different nature. The present nihilism is not hermeneutical nihilism, is actually destructive nihilism. And the financial nihilism is based on a sort of transformation of the basic forms of capital accumulation, what accumulation was in the age of the industrial capitalism. You know it very well. Karl Marx has explained everything about that, and Marx told us the goal of the capitalist is to increase the amount of money he has in the bank, let's say. I mean, the focus of capitalists is on exchange value, but in order to produce value, in order to accumulate money and so on, the capitalist needs to produce this table, to produce the car, to produce the world. So the history of industrial capitalism is based on the idea that in order to produce exchange value, capitalism has to go through the production of the useful world of things. Then what? If you look at the present reality, you don't see a process of accumulation through production of useful things. The monetary transformation is based on the idea that if you want to increase the amount of money you have in your pockets, you have to work on money on that level. It's money that produce more money, but something happens in between. Something happens from the beginning to the end of the financial accumulation. And what happens is the destruction of the world that has been produced during the last 200 years. This is what is happening in Greece. This is what is happening in Italy, what is happening in the United Kingdom. I mean, the destruction of the welfare, the destruction of the educational system, the systematic privatization of social goods. This is the destructive, nihilist condition of capital accumulation. The outcome of this is that the Italian industrial system has been destroyed in terms of 25% less. 25% of the Italian industrial system has disappeared. It is no more there. You see, it's huge, and it has happened in the last 6 years. Well, This is the present form of nihilism. How can you call this if not suicide? Not to mention, of course, the environmental catastrophe and so on and so on. But I don't want to play easy. I want to understand the nature of financial capitalism. And I say the only explanation of it is suicide.
Yeah, so to take the privilege of being the one on stage asking the questions at this point, I wanted to also ask you, because I've written on it, about accelerationism, which may fit into the context of suicide in one way or another. And obviously, you've written criticisms of accelerationism recently in Efflux and in other places, stressing the way in which accelerationism is right in the sense that it grasps an immanent conception of the world. So it doesn't appeal to a transcendent value. So it's, for those of you lucky enough not to be exposed to accelerationism, it's the belief in kind of selecting and speeding up particular forms and forces of technology and abstraction. So you argue that there's a kind of sense to this, starting, like you say, where there's no way out, starting from within this system of nihilism, within a capitalism that has reduced everything to the form of monetary value. Like you say, a kind of, rather than a philosophical nihilism, a lived nihilism. You know, we live it now. We don't have to write texts about it like Nietzsche did. But on the other hand, you also kind of invoke again this sort of questions around potency, the kind of productive forces of the cognitariat, the knowledge workers, and also within your kind of work, there's a sort of, which coming back to suicide, if I could call it a kind of negative accelerationism, a kind of sense of the strategy of catastrophe. So I just wondered if you could say maybe a bit more about this kind of strategy and how you kind of think it through in your work in terms of this.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, the accelerationist thing is interesting because it's so ambiguous in the good sense of the word. On one side, accelerationism is based on the very Marxist idea that the tendency is the dimension in which the possibility is inscribed. The good possibility is inscribed. And so, as the tendency is acceleration, we have to find the good possibility inscribed in this direction. Well, the concept of possibility should be more precisely investigated. I think, because the problem of accelerationism, the bad side of accelerationism, is a sort of determinism of the tendency. As things, as the process of production and circulation of goods and information is becoming more and more fast, is becoming more and more rich and productive, this is going to result in an effect of liberation. Yeah, okay, this is the tendency. Then you have to take in account, you have to consider also the flesh, the body, the real social body in which this process, the tendency, is inscribed. So I see acceleration from the point of view of the fragility, of the precariousness of the social body, and also, and at this point I say, let's think better about the concept of possibility. Possibility is about the future, but is it really about the future? So I start thinking that future is probably a concept that it's not enough to say future. Future means nothing. We don't know anything about the future. We know what in the present is inscribed. So let's call it futurability, if I can. Futurability is much more interesting than future, because futurability means the possibilities and the impossibility and incompossibility inscribed in the present and also in the past. Because probably the possibility, let's be more explicit, the possibility of liberation from the slavery of work, the liberation from salaried work and so on, this possibility was inscribed in a precise moment of the past history. Then at a certain point, 35 years ago, this possibility was sort of encapsulated, if I can say. You see, this kind of encapsulation of a past possibility, which is part of our futurability, but is not part of our future. So the problem is going back to that moment, when someone in the United Kingdom said there is no such thing as society. People started killing themselves after that. And now society has disappeared. So the sentence of Margaret Thatcher was not the description of reality, was a self-fulfilling prophecy. And now the prophecy is fulfilled. Society has disappeared. Only competition, only war is with our present. How can we disentangle the encapsulated possibility from the present capitalist gestalt? This is my consideration acceleration. Yes, you are right, but we are talking of something that exists, but has been sort of encapsulated.
And to follow up on that around the question of possibility and futurability, obviously one of the moments which your book focuses on and which you've talked a lot about in your work is 1977 as the year of punk and the declaration of no future, the moment of, as you say, early neoliberalism, or just the emergent signs of neoliberalism, and also the crisis for the autonomia in the face of state repression. So I wonder if you could talk more about, the future in the past, and the future that did not take place or has not yet taken place.
Yeah, right. Has not yet taken place. That is good formulation about futurability. Yeah, I insist very much about 77 because it's part of my memory. But in a sense, also, it's the year when some interesting things happen. Not only Charlie Chaplin dying, which is a sort of declaration of the end of modern kindness, of modern humanity, and but also is the year when Louis Brown is conceived. Louis Brown is the first human being produced in provetta. How do you say provetta? Artificially bioengineered, right? And also is the year when Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak create the Apple trademark, So, and obviously the year when Sid Vicious declares, oh yes, there is no such thing as society, so no future. And you see, everything is there. We have to go back and to look at that year, that period, that moment, that so what has happened essentially? I tell you by my old-fashioned Marxist point of view, I tell you that the essential thing that happens in that moment is that we have the possibility of starting a process of reduction of the time of the lifetime dedicated to work. In that moment, in many points of the world, particularly in Italy, of course, which is a country of lazy people, obliged to be workers, in that moment, in many places of the world, people understand, for instance, Jobs and Wozniak, that technology is a good thing because it's giving us the possibility of becoming free from the real slavery, which is work, salaried work, of course. So we are able in that moment to imagine a possible future, which is a future of activity, of creation, no more of salaried work. Then we miss that point. We miss that moment. It has to be, why did we miss that moment? Oh, it's not only Margaret Thatcher, you know, it's also the unions. I mean, Arthur Scargill crying, we want to work, is certainly a good guy, but not that smart from the point of view of imagining a possible future. The problem is that in that moment we missed the possibility of saying, yes, we stop going to the factory because it is possible to develop a symbiosis, a positive interaction between refusal of work and cognitariat and cognitive creation of liberating technology. This is the point that we have missed in that moment. Can we go back and start again? That's a dramatic question, because for many reasons going back seems difficult. For instance, something has happened in the soul of people, something has happened in precarization of life and of social relations, something has happened in the environment, and so on and so on. But that is the point. Let's go back to the point when the possibility is missed.
Yeah, I mean, I guess this is what I'm sort of still kind of interested in, is the way we might reactivate that possibility within, as you say, a horizon of precarity, when, you know, the imagination is of robot manufacturer removing the few remaining jobs that we have, you know, the kind of Terminator, but more boring in the sense that they don't have to come and kill you. They just take your job and you die. So again, this kind of, how would we, you know, kind of engage a process of liberating technology or ending work that simply doesn't end in bare life, social abandonment, without, you know, you say about the unions, I'm just being British, I'm more pro-union, because we didn't have much radical stuff outside of them. But, you know, without those social forms and forces that still existed in 77, you know, what are the kind of new social movements, forms that would carry out a role that now obviously seems more difficult, or certainly global, in relationship to global capitalism?
I read an interview with Larry Page some days ago. You can find this interview in Computer World magazine. And Larry Page, who is not a radical Marxist, as you know, he says Google is massively investing in robotization. And also he says, I am not sure that it's a good idea to work 40 hours per week, because 45 of the jobs that are now the source of your salary can be cancelled tomorrow morning. We can replace you tomorrow morning if you want. So the problem is that we have kind of lost the cultural, probably I should say the psychological ability to think about our life in terms of freedom. I mean, neoliberalism, that is so rhetorically emphasizing freedom, has essentially erased our ability to think our time in terms of freedom. We are frightened by the idea of being really free, not politically. Forget about the shit of political freedom. Freedom is not a political thing. It's something much more serious than politics. Freedom is being with yourself, with your body, with your time. We have lost the ability to live together with our time. That's the problem. This is why I speak of suicidal persons, because the problem of Harris and Diebold, the killers of Columbine, for instance, is that they wrote in their diaries. They are writers. If I was a publisher, I would publish the diaries of Chosengui and of Harris and Diebold, and they say, "Oh, you told me that I have to be a winner. And you gave me shit all the time because I look like a loser. I will show you I will be a winner for a moment, but I will be a winner." You see, this is why we are unable to think in terms of freedom of our life, because we need to be a winner. That is the problem. It's the most important intellectual, philosophical, and political task of our time, to revitalize, to reactivate the understanding that life is something more interesting than work and profit.
Verso is out the front, so there's a publication opportunity for the future series. Not that we want to encourage people to go and kill people to get published, but I do. I guess I am more depressed and feel that fear of freedom. But I think as an excuse or truth, I mean, one of the things which I know you're saying in the book, because you have a very nice formulation, which I like, capitalist absolutism, is one of the problems is not simply the imagination of freedom, it's the reality that we can't separate ourselves from capitalism as an absolute horizon, in particular, certainly in particular places like the UK, without this kind of social or literal death, in the sense that we have to go to work unless we're independently wealthy. We are not working 45 hours a week because we like it, as you say. We are working because that's the only way to live. So again, I'm kind of interested in what you point out, the kind of material limits to imagination, which aren't a choice. We're not choosing not to imagine freedom, but we're living a constant state of unfreedom. And it's, for many people, I don't think it's even the imagination that we could be winners, although you're right, one of the things my pet hates about contemporary Britain is the lottery, national lottery, which I think should be banned, because I'm an old leftist who likes spoiling people's enjoyment. Before we get on to competitive TV programs about singing, which I would also ban on a number of grounds. But so there's the kind of winning thing, but there's also just the surviving thing, which comes back to the kind of people in your book. So there's an ideology of winners, but also a kind of, I don't know, Hobbesian kind of clinging on to just anything. And I think that's what I think is makes it hard to imagine how to help or deal with that, both individually or collectively, and this kind of desperation that is materially and socially produced, that, like you say, kind of gets buried or seen only in these extreme cases, but these are just the tip of the iceberg of a everyday panic, anxiety, depression, whatever?
Well, despair, that's a word that comes to the mind when you read the subtitle of this horrible book. But I want to say something that we tend to link despair and unhappiness. What I discovered writing this book, frankly speaking, I already knew before, and what I experienced writing this book is that despair and unhappiness are not linked. You can be despaired and perfectly happy. I think to be despaired and happy because despair is about your intellectual understanding of the world, and happiness is about your heart, is about your body, is about your vitalist relation to the body of the other. You know, this is, and what is more important, your understanding or your body? Your body, in my opinion, absolutely, because your body is telling the truth. Your understanding is always little bit, it's trying to understand, but it never really understands. So follow your body, follow your happiness. But of course, your body has to be happy. So the problem of therapy, the word therapy is a bad word, but I don't have a better word to say the art of creating a happy environment. This is our political task. Then comes the possibility of changing our understanding and so on. But we have to be helped by something, and we need an help from the outside world. And this help, I think it's the catastrophe, it's the apocalypse, it's the final break. This is why I am so interested in the European Union. Not because I am a European, that means nothing. I am not a patriot, and I will never be. So I don't feel the pride of being European, but I like the idea that Europe has been, is, and can be in the future the place where interesting things are first experienced. Now I think that we are on the brink of the European apocalypse. Let's be prepared to that, because it can be a good start for a better world.
I think on the note of happy despair, just formulation, I think I'll adopt or live. We've got some time for questions from the audience. We've got about 15 minutes, I think. So.
I was interested in what Benjamin was saying at the start, the first question about kind of the collectivism of irony. But maybe I could sort of ask that question in a slightly different way. And how does that kind of post-structuralist methodology, how is that mobilized? How does that come to create a progressive collectivity in the face of, say, hegemony that is overwhelmingly filled by neoliberal capitalism today, the world over, whatever political form it is, and recognizing neoliberalism probably as a crisis in the state form. So I guess it's a question about your methodology. Is it time to move beyond that post-structuralist perspective? And by coincidence, I was reading Yanis Varoufakis's book yesterday, and the first line of that is something along the lines of, "Nothing humanizes us quite like aporia." And it seems to me that irony from that perspective is a reaction to aporia in the way that kind of Alexander Kluger talks about irony, for example. So what's next is the question. How is it mobilized?
What next is a difficult question. And also asking about a methodology for a collective process of liberation is a difficult question, but I am here to answer difficult questions, so thank you. And and I try, of course. In my personal experience, irony has been really not a weapon. I don't like the idea of irony as a weapon, but has been in the Italian 77, which is much less dark than the British 77. The strategy, in a sense, was a linguistic semiotic strategy. We have been much more learning things from Umberto Eco than from Tony Negri, from a certain point of view. And it was a semiotic strategy. And the idea was it's important to understand that our description, our perception, our enunciation of the world is not the truth. It's a possible truth. So many other levels of interpretation, explanation, and projection of the world are possible. So don't tell the truth. Truth is banal. Try to say something diverging from. This is, in my opinion, this is a good starting point for today also. Don't be don't accept the hypocritical version of the political elite nowadays. Don't accept the idea that democracy will solve things and so on. Tell the truth to yourself as far as concerns the present impossibility, but at the same time start the process of enunciation of what is politically impossible, but possible at the level of technology, at the level of imagination, at the level of the real world that has nothing to do with politics. So irony in a certain way now is dispelling the smog, the smoke of the political interpretation of the world, and going forward to discovering the many possibilities that are implied in. You also said something about despair, but I forgot.
I said something about Yanis Varoufakis saying that nothing humanizes us quite like aporia. It seems to me that's quite an apt description of like kind of the European Union right now.
Yeah, okay.
But so I'll give the microphone. But I just wondered. So is irony the new Gramsci moment? Is that a possibility?
Yeah. In a sense.
Hegemony of irony.
Hi.
The ironical Gramscian.
Every subjectivity has its. I'm over here.
Hello. Oh yeah.
Hello.
I see you.
Every subjectivity has a corresponding form of domesticity and form of space which goes along with it. And I wanted to ask you, it's very clear what the role of real estate, property, the home, the house has been in the rise of neoliberalism. But I wanted to ask you about the role of domestic architecture in addressing the conditions of the precariat and the cognitariat.
I am not sure of understanding the meaning of domestication and domestic relation, but it makes me think something that is probably the good answer to your question. The relation to the house, the relation to the space, the relation to the to inhabiting a space. This is a good viewpoint in order to understand Michel Foucault has not written a book about inhabiting, about the house, but it's the forgotten book of Foucault. I mean, I have been living for 20 years in a house together with many other people, 7 probably or 8, but sometimes much more. And what is the meaning of living in a collective house? The meaning is, first of all, you don't need to work because someone is always working for you in a house with 7 other people. So this kind of idea of circulation, of cashing a salary, of second, the perception of the body of the other as something that is enhancing your possibility, not reducing your possibility. Well, I'm talking of the 70s, of the 80s. I'm talking of nowadays living together has become something much different generally. Of course, I don't speak of singular situations. In general, I know that students who in Bologna live in a common house have the impression of living a bad situation of poverty and so on. So what I want to say is that the disciplining in the Foucauldian sense of the space is like the disciplining of consumption. For instance, the idea of consumption as a private act. The idea that every person has to have his, her own object of property. This is obviously the main force of subjugation that we are experiencing nowadays. Probably before we have been investigating about the possibility of disentangle, of de-encapsulate a possibility. I think that the first thing to do is to discover the points of imprisonment, of privatization. Privatization, this word that has been so crucial in the neoliberal transformation of the world, should be re-examined. Let's try to understand what privatization means, not only at the economic level, but also in the daily life, in sexuality, in consumption, in the relation to the space and of the house.
I wanted to ask about technology, and despite the sort of dystopian and automated nature of today's technological use, for example, in the Soul of Work, you look at the cell phone and the way it's pervaded our everyday interaction with technology. We're always on call for work, and we're always connected, and I guess that has its own pathological elements to it. But then if you think about it in relation to the social movements, and Hong Kong, Egypt, and even here in London, we dubbed it the BlackBerry insurrection. And I guess I want to know, do you think our mantra should be cognitariats and precariats of the world unite, you have nothing to lose but your iPhone? Or is the iPhone the new pitchfork?
Yeah, thank you. I will steal this. Well, you know, the relation between social life and technology, particularly when it comes to information technology, to communication technology, is an intricate labyrinth. Because on one side, we have to say that technology has enhanced our possibility of socialization, of also of political organization. In many, you quote Hong Kong, you quote Cairo, and so on. But simultaneously, the same technology and the same procedures are transforming our perception of the other into a virtualized, abstract relation and perception. So I would not say that the Facebook is useful or Facebook is bad. It's the wrong way to investigate on the question. The problem is that as a tool for production, as a source, as an economic and socializing tool, Facebook is destroying friendship, not creating friendship. But at the same time, it can be considered as a tool among many. But the relation between technology and life has always been a riddle of ambiguities, because the problem is not what is the technology. The problem is what is life. I mean, how are you able to disencapsulate, disentangle the possibilities that are inscribed in technology? Then you have to forget about technology itself. By this point of view, let's go back to work and automatic technology. Automation has been the main methodology for the liberation of human time. It has already been this in the past centuries. And now the process of automation has taken a new place. It's invading, it's capturing the cognitive activity itself. And here starts the danger. Here the liberating side of automation is replaced by the entangling side of automation itself. Well, I forgot your question actually, but it was not a question. No, it was. Did I answer? Yeah. Oh, thank you.
Okay, I think we have time for just one last question. If we have it. No? In which case, are you sure? Okay, in which case, I would like to thank you all so much for coming. I'd also like to thank Sarah Shin and the team at Verso for your help with organising this. It's been fantastic, thank you. Also, Franco's kindly agreed to sign some books, should you wish. His book is on sale in the bookshop, and we'll be doing that in here, so just pop out, and if you need to come back in, then show your ticket. But most importantly, Ben, Franco, thank you very much.